80 candles flickered on the birthday cake, but the real fire was about to ignite when Daniel Patterson handed his pregnant wife the divorce papers in front of everyone who mattered in their social world. His grandmother's 80th birthday party had drawn 200 guests to the Patterson estate, but Elena stood alone near the terrace doors in a dress she'd bought at a discount store, her 6-month baby bump barely concealed beneath the fabric, unaware that her husband's mistress Natalie was about to engineer the most degrading moment of her life while his entire family watched with approval. The soup, an expensive truffle cream bisque, seemed to leap from Natalie's hands onto Elena's feet as if choreographed, but the real performance began when Natalie handed her the cleaning supplies with a smile that promised this was only the beginning of her humiliation. Daniel's pregnant wife dropped to her knees as commanded, while her husband signed paperwork with his attorney nearby. But none of the Patterson family members laughing at the spectacle knew they were mocking a secret trillionaire who'd hidden her identity so completely that even private investigators had found nothing but a fabricated middle-class background. The Rodriguez dynasty controlled shipping ports, tech startups, and pharmaceutical companies across 4 continents, but Elena had buried that truth to marry a man she thought would love her for her character, rather than her unfathomable wealth. His entire family laughed. His mother raised a toast to finally getting rid of dead weight. His cousins recorded videos for their social media. His grandmother called her the cleaning girl carrying bastard baggage. But what Elena did when she rose from that floor with one hand protecting her unborn child and made a single phone call would crush Daniel so completely that he would collapse in regret within minutes, his carefully planned betrayal transforming into his own destruction. Would Daniel survive the revelation that he'd just divorced the one woman who could have saved his family's failing business empire while carrying his child? Or would his choice to humiliate his pregnant wife at his grandmother's milestone birthday become the catastrophic error that left him broken, bankrupt, and begging for forgiveness that would never pay? The Patterson estate had never looked more magnificent, but Elena Rodriguez Patterson felt like a ghost haunting someone else's celebration as she stood near the French doors leading to the garden terrace. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's homes cast prismatic light across 200 guests who'd gathered to celebrate Margaret Patterson's 80th year of life. But not one of them had spoken to Elena since she'd arrived 30 minutes late from her obstetrics appointment. Her 6-month pregnancy made the discount dress she wore cling awkwardly to her changing body, but Daniel had made it clear 3 weeks ago that she wasn't worth the expense of a new wardrobe for some old lady's party. The irony would have made her laugh if her heart wasn't breaking with every passing minute. She watched her husband across the ballroom, his hand resting possessively on Natalie Chen's lower back as they spoke with his business partners near the champagne fountain. Natalie wore a dress that cost $8,000. Elena knew because she'd seen the receipt on Daniel's desk last Tuesday, the same day she'd found the apartment lease he'd signed for his mistress in downtown Boston, the same day she'd made the decision that tonight would be the end of her 3-year experiment in living as someone ordinary, someone powerless, someone who could be loved for reasons that had nothing to do with the Rodriguez name that controlled more wealth than most small nations. "You look positively radiant, dear." Margaret Patterson's voice cut through Elena's thoughts like a blade wrapped in velvet. The birthday woman herself approached with a smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes, but her granddaughter-in-law had learned to read the cruelty beneath the society manners. "Though I must say, that dress is quite humble for such an important family occasion." "I appreciate your concern, Margaret," Elena replied, softly, her hand instinctively moving to protect the child growing inside her. She'd stopped calling her grandmother 2 months ago when the woman had suggested Daniel should reconsider his options before the baby arrived. Margaret's laugh tinkled like breaking glass, but before she could respond, Daniel's voice rang out across the ballroom with the practiced projection of a man who'd attended private schools his entire life. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment," he announced, raising his champagne glass as conversations died and 200 faces turned toward him. Elena's stomach dropped as she recognized the predatory satisfaction in his expression. She'd seen it before when he'd closed difficult business deals. "Before we cut my grandmother's magnificent birthday cake, I have a personal announcement to make." The room fell into expectant silence, but Elena noticed Natalie moving through the crowd with deliberate purpose, carrying a bowl of soup on a silver tray. Everything suddenly crystallized with horrible clarity. This wasn't just a public announcement, but a choreographed humiliation designed to destroy her dignity before her identity destroyed his world. Marriage is about partnership, about shared values and mutual respect, Daniel continued, his eyes finally landing on Elena with cold finality. "For 3 years I've tried to build something meaningful with my wife, but some gaps simply cannot be bridged." Elena comes from modest circumstances. She works as a part-time bookkeeper at a nonprofit, drives a 15-year-old sedan, and frankly, she's never quite fit into our family's social circles. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Elena remained frozen as Natalie approached her position near the terrace doors. Her husband's mistress wore an expression of manufactured sympathy that made Elena's skin crawl, but she recognized the performance for what it was, the final act in a play designed to justify Daniel's betrayal. "I wish her well, of course," Daniel said, pulling folded papers from his jacket pocket. "But tonight, at this celebration of family legacy, I think it's time to acknowledge that our paths must diverge. Elena, these are divorce papers. My attorney has reviewed everything. You'll receive a fair settlement naturally, but I think we both know this marriage was a mistake from the beginning." He crossed the ballroom with papers extended, but Natalie reached Elena first. The truffle cream bisque, imported from France at $90 per serving, seemed to launch itself from the bowl as Natalie stumbled with theatrical precision. The hot liquid splashed across Elena's discount shoes and the hem of her dress, but more importantly, it splashed across her dignity in front of every person who mattered in Boston's elite social circles. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Natalie gasped, but her eyes glittered with malicious triumph as she thrust a stack of white cleaning towels at Elena. "Here, you'd better clean that up before it stains the Persian rug. That rug is worth more than, well, you know." The implication hung in the air like poison. Elena took the towels with hands that had stopped trembling, but not because fear had left her body, rather because a cold clarity had settled over her like armor forged from 3 years of disappointment. She lowered herself to her knees carefully, protecting her pregnant belly as she began wiping the expensive soup from the Persian rug that had been in the Patterson family for 4 generations, but cost less than the watch her grandfather had given her for her 16th birthday. The laughter started small, a suppressed giggle from Daniel's cousin Rebecca, who'd always treated Elena like household staff rather than family. Then his brother Marcus joined in with a snort. He tried to hide behind his champagne glass, but the dam truly broke when Margaret Patterson's cackle echoed across the ballroom like a victory bell. Finally, Daniel's mother, Catherine, raised her own glass in a toast that silenced the nervous whispers. "A toast to my son, who's finally getting rid of the dead weight he's been carrying for 3 years. Daniel, darling, you deserve someone who can actually contribute to this family's standing, not some bookkeeper who shops at discount stores and embarrasses us at every social function." The crowd's laughter swelled as phones emerged from pockets and designer clutches, Daniel's cousins recording videos for their social media followers, his business partners exchanging knowing smirks, his grandmother's friends nodding approval, as if they were watching justice being served rather than cruelty being celebrated. Elena scrubbed the rug methodically as Daniel approached with the divorce papers. but her mind was traveling backward through 3 years of carefully constructed lies. She remembered the day she'd walked into that community college business class as Elena Foster, her real identity buried under layers of falsified documents and shell companies that had cost her legal team millions to construct. She'd been 26 years old and had just inherited the Rodriguez empire after her father's sudden heart attack. Shipping ports in Singapore and Los Angeles, pharmaceutical companies developing cancer treatments, technology startups disrupting industries from artificial intelligence to renewable energy, real estate holdings across 4 continents that generated more passive income in a month than the Patterson family's struggling investment firm earned in a year. But she'd watched her mother die alone in a mansion surrounded by people who loved the Rodriguez money more than they'd ever loved Maria Rodriguez herself. And Elena had made a decision that her advisors had called insane. She would find someone who could love her for something beyond the fortune that made her one of the 30 wealthiest individuals under 40 in the entire world. Daniel had seemed perfect, charming but not too smooth, ambitious but not greedy, attentive in ways that had made her believe she'd finally found something real. She'd fallen in love with his laugh, with the way he'd helped an elderly woman carry groceries to her car, with his apparent kindness that now revealed itself as performance art designed to secure what he thought was a respectable middle-class wife. "Sign here," Daniel said, dropping the papers beside her kneeling form as Natalie wrapped her arm around his waist with possessive satisfaction. "My attorney has been very generous. You'll get $50,000 and can keep your car. That's more than fair for someone who brought nothing to this marriage except disappointment." Margaret's voice rang out again, carrying across the ballroom with the authority of 8 decades. The cleaning girl carrying bastard baggage finally knows her place, on her knees where she belongs. The laughter reached its crescendo as Elena finished wiping the last of the soup and rose to her feet with one hand supporting her pregnant belly. Daniel's child, though he'd apparently decided 6 months of pregnancy wasn't enough to earn basic human decency. She looked at the divorce papers, then at her husband's face, then at the 200 people who'd just revealed exactly who they were when they thought they held all the power. Elena reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, not the cheap Android she'd carried for 3 years as part of her disguise, but a different phone she'd kept for emergencies. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced precision as she pulled up a contact simply labeled Marcus. Not her husband's brother Marcus, but Marcus Holloway, her chief legal counsel, the man who'd spent 3 years managing her hidden empire while she played house with a man who'd just proven he never deserved her trust. She pressed dial and raised the phone to her ear as the laughter finally began to die down, replaced by confused murmurs as the guests noticed something had shifted in the atmosphere. "Marcus," Elena said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom with crystalline clarity. "This is Elena Rodriguez, authorization code Alpha 779. I need you to execute Protocol Midnight immediately. Yes, all of it. The Patterson Investment Group holdings, the commercial real estate portfolio, and the personal accounts. Every single asset we discussed." She paused, watching Daniel's face transform from smug satisfaction to confused concern. "And Marcus, make sure the press release goes out within the hour. I want everyone to know exactly who I am and what family just made the biggest mistake of their lives." The phone clicked off. Margaret Patterson's face had gone completely white, but Catherine spoke first, her voice sharp with defensive anger. "What kind of ridiculous game is this? Elena, really, this is embarrassing even for you." "My name," Elena interrupted, her voice soft but carrying the weight of generations of power, "is Elena Maria Rodriguez. My grandfather founded Rodriguez Global Shipping in 1952. My father expanded into pharmaceuticals and technology before his death 3 years ago. The empire I inherited is currently valued at $47 billion. give or take a few $100 million depending on market fluctuations. The silence that followed was absolute. Your family's investment firm, Daniel, has been struggling for the past 18 months, Elena continued, watching her husband's face cycle through disbelief, recognition, and dawning horror. You've been losing clients to Bergman Financial. You're overextended on commercial real estate that's losing value, and you're approximately 90 days from defaulting on loans you took to maintain appearances. I know this because Rodriguez Capital acquired 63% of your debt 3 weeks ago. I was planning to forgive it as a wedding anniversary gift, but circumstances have changed. Daniel's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor, but no one moved to clean it. The apartment building where you've set up your Mistress? I bought it yesterday. The country club where you bring clients. Rodriguez Holdings acquired it last month. The private school where you've already enrolled our unborn child without consulting me. My family endowed their scholarship program in 1987. Elena's hand moved to her belly again, protective and fierce. Every piece of the life you thought made you superior to me exists because people like my family built the infrastructure you take for granted. She turned to Margaret, who'd collapsed into a nearby chair with one hand clutched to her chest. Your birthday gift from your grandson was going to be the announcement that he'd secured a major investor for Patterson Investment Group, a $200 million capital infusion that would have saved your family's legacy. That investor was me, Margaret. I was going to reveal my identity tonight anyway, but as a celebration rather than a divorce. I was going to save your family because I loved your grandson and wanted our child to inherit something beyond my own fortune. Catherine's toast glass dropped from her hand as the reality crashed over her like a tidal wave. But instead, you called my child bastard baggage. You made me clean soup off your floor while pregnant. You laughed as your son destroyed me in front of 200 witnesses. Elena's voice never rose above conversational level, but every word landed like a judge's gavel. So here's what happens now. Patterson Investment Group's debt becomes due immediately. The commercial properties you're over-leveraged on will be foreclosed within 30 days. And Daniel? She finally looked directly at her husband, who'd gone gray as ash. You just divorced $47 billion while carrying your only child. Natalie is welcome to you, but I hope she understands that the man she's getting is about to lose everything, his business, his reputation, his family's legacy, and the child he just rejected. Daniel's knees buckled as the full weight of his catastrophic mistake hit him like a physical blow. He collapsed onto the floor where Elena had been kneeling minutes before, his breathing coming in ragged gasps as his entire world disintegrated around him. Elena, wait, I didn't... Words failed him as regret crushed his chest like a vice, but Elena was already walking toward the terrace doors, leaving the divorce papers unsigned on the floor beside her ex-husband's broken form. 3 months had passed since Margaret Patterson's 80th birthday party became the most talked-about social disaster in Boston's elite circles, but Elena Rodriguez wasn't in Boston anymore. She'd moved to a small coastal town in Maine called Harbor's Rest, where nobody recognized her face and the grocery store cashiers didn't follow financial news. Her daughter, she'd learned at the ultrasound 2 weeks after the party, was due in 6 weeks, but Elena had decided to spend these final months of pregnancy somewhere she could breathe without the weight of her empire pressing down on every moment. The cottage she'd rented sat 50 yards from the ocean, but it wasn't one of the massive estates that dotted the more fashionable parts of Maine's coastline. This was a simple 2-bedroom structure with weathered shingles and a porch that creaked when the wind came off the Atlantic, but it felt more like home than any of the 17 properties she owned across the world. She'd hired exactly one person to help her, a local handyman named Thomas Reed, who'd been recommended by her real estate agent for basic repairs and maintenance. Thomas had arrived on her second day in Harbor's Rest to fix a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink, but he'd stayed in her life for reasons that had nothing to do with plumbing. He was 34 years old with hands that showed evidence of real work, calluses earned from carpentry and construction rather than gym equipment and golf clubs. His truck was 15 years old but immaculately maintained, and he'd shown up to that first appointment with tools that had been used so frequently that the handles were worn smooth. But what had captured Elena's attention wasn't his appearance or his work ethic. It was the way he'd noticed her struggling to lift a box of books and had simply helped without making her feel weak or incapable. "You shouldn't be lifting heavy things this far along," he'd said, but his tone carried concern rather than judgment. "My sister was pregnant last year and her doctor was always warning her about overdoing it. Where do you want these?" 2 years had passed since Elena first arrived in Harbor's Rest, but the cottage that had once been a temporary refuge had transformed into something permanent and precious. Sophia was now 2.5 years old, speaking in full sentences and displaying her mother's sharp intelligence in the way she insisted on sorting her toys by color and size. Thomas had become a fixture in their lives, not just a presence but the foundation that held their small family together in ways that felt natural rather than forced. He'd proposed 6 months ago on the beach where they'd taken Sophia to see her first sunset, but the ring had been a simple silver band he'd crafted himself in his workshop rather than the obscene diamond that Daniel had presented like a trophy. Elena had said yes without hesitation, but she'd also known that the time had finally come to reveal the truth she'd been protecting for nearly 3 years. The conversation she'd been both dreading and anticipating arrived on a Saturday morning in October when Sophia was at a playdate with Thomas's sister's daughter. Elena had arranged for them to be alone, had prepared coffee the way Thomas liked it, and had pulled out documents she'd kept hidden in a safe deposit box at the Harbor's Rest National Bank. Thomas sat at her kitchen table with confusion written across his honest face as Elena placed folder after folder in front of him. Corporate documents, financial statements, property deeds, and finally a Forbes magazine from 2 years ago with her photograph on the cover under the headline, "The Invisible Billionaire, How Elena Rodriguez Disappeared from High Society." "I don't understand," Thomas said slowly, his hands not quite touching the documents as if they might burn him. "This says, Elena, this says you're worth $47 billion. That can't be right. You drive a 10-year-old sedan. You shop at the discount grocery store. You've been wearing the same winter coat for 2 years." "Because none of those things matter to me anymore," Elena replied softly, sitting across from him with her hands folded to keep them from trembling. "The woman you met 3 years ago was running from a life where everything I owned felt like a prison, and everyone who claimed to love me was really in love with what I could give them. My husband, my ex-husband, divorced me while I was pregnant with Sophia because he thought I was worthless. He humiliated me at his grandmother's birthday party in front of 200 people, made me clean soup off the floor while they laughed, and handed me divorce papers like I was garbage he needed to discard." Thomas's jaw tightened with anger, but he stayed silent as Elena continued. "He didn't know I was a secret trillionaire. Nobody knew except my legal team and financial advisors. I'd hidden my identity to find someone who could love me for who I was, rather than what I could buy them." She pushed the Forbes magazine toward him and he finally picked it up with hands that shook slightly. "When I revealed the truth at that party, I destroyed his entire family. Their business collapsed. Their social standing evaporated, and Daniel spent the next 6 months calling me and begging for forgiveness that I would never give him." "Good," Thomas said fiercely, and the protective anger in his voice made Elena's heart swell. "He deserved worse than that for what he did to you, for what he did to Sophia, rejecting his own daughter before she was even born. I came to Harbor's Rest because I needed to start over somewhere nobody knew my name," Elena continued, reaching across the table to take his hand. And then I met you, and you were kind without expecting anything in return. You helped me without knowing I could have paid you $1,000,000 for fixing that leaking pipe. You stayed at the hospital when Sophia was born, even though we'd only known each other 3 months. You loved my daughter like she was your own before I ever gave you any reason to believe we might have a future together." Thomas's eyes had gone glassy with unshed tears, but he squeezed her hand tightly. "So I tested you, Thomas, just like I tested Daniel, but you passed every single test without even knowing you were being evaluated. I left money visible, mentioned inheritances, created opportunities for you to ask me for financial help, and you never once treated me differently. You never saw me as an opportunity or a prize to be won. You just saw Elena, the woman struggling to be a good mother, and you loved her, loved us, without conditions." "I still do," Thomas whispered. "Elena, I don't care if you're worth 47 billion or $47. I fell in love with the woman who makes pancakes shaped like dinosaurs for Sophia, and who laughs at my terrible jokes, and who kisses me like I'm the only man in the entire world. The money doesn't change any of that." "I know," Elena said, and she realized she was crying even though she was smiling. "That's why I'm telling you now. Because I know you mean it, and I know you'll still mean it tomorrow and next year and 20 years from now. You're not Daniel, Thomas. You're everything he pretended to be and everything I hoped existed, but was afraid I'd never find." Thomas stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was precious and fragile and strong all at once. "So what happens now?" he asked against her hair. "Do we stay here in Harbor's Rest, or do we move to some mansion somewhere? Do I need to learn which fork to use at fancy dinners, or can we just keep being us?" Elena laughed through her tears, pulling back to look at his face. "We keep being us. I'll handle the business meetings remotely like I have been. We'll stay in this cottage if you want, or we can build something bigger if Sophia needs more space as she grows. Maybe we'll travel sometimes, show her the world beyond Maine. But the foundation stays the same. You, me, and Sophia. Our family, our life, our happiness that doesn't depend on anything except each other." "I can do that," Thomas said, and then he was kissing her with a tenderness that made the past 3 years of pain feel like a distant memory. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony on the beach, with exactly 12 people in attendance. Thomas's family, Elena's most trusted advisors who'd flown in from across the country, and Sophia, as the flower girl who mostly just ate the petals instead of scattering them. Elena wore a simple white dress that cost $300 instead of $300,000, but she'd never felt more beautiful than when Thomas looked at her like she was his entire universe. The years that followed brought 2 more children, a son they named Gabriel, and then another daughter named Isabella, and a life that balanced Elena's business empire with the simple joys of family dinners and beach walks and homework help. Thomas continued his carpentry work because he loved creating things with his hands, but he eventually expanded into teaching workshops for underprivileged youth, funded quietly by the Rodriguez Foundation that Elena had established to honor her father's memory. As for Daniel Patterson, Elena heard occasional updates through business channels. He'd declared bankruptcy, his family's investment firm had been liquidated, and he'd moved to a modest apartment in a less fashionable part of Boston. Natalie had left him within months of the birthday party disaster, and he'd apparently spent the intervening years working a middle management position at a company that didn't know or care about his former social standing. He'd tried to establish visitation rights with Sophia once, but Elena's attorneys had presented the video footage from the birthday party, the cruelty, the laughter, the public rejection of his pregnant wife and unborn child, and the judge had denied his petition without hesitation. Elena never wished him specific harm, but she also never forgave him. Some betrayals were simply too fundamental to excuse, and some choices revealed character so clearly that redemption became impossible. He'd shown her exactly who he was when he thought she had no power, and that truth would follow him for the rest of his life. But on the evening of her 5th wedding anniversary with Thomas, as she watched him play with their 3 children in the surf, while the sun set over the Atlantic, Elena realized that Daniel's cruelty had been the catalyst for her greatest happiness. If he hadn't handed her those divorce papers at his grandmother's 80th birthday party, she never would have moved to Harbor's Rest. She never would have met Thomas. She never would have discovered that real love did exist. It just required finding someone who valued character over wealth and who saw her as a person rather than a prize. Sophia ran up from the water with a shell she'd found, pressing it into Elena's hand with the absolute confidence that this treasure would be appreciated. "Look, Mama, it's beautiful." "It really is, sweetheart," Elena agreed, pulling her daughter close as Thomas approached with Gabriel on his shoulders and Isabella in his arms. "Ready to head back?" Thomas asked, and his smile still had the power to make Elena's heart skip after 5 years of marriage. "Ready," she confirmed, standing to gather their family for the walk home. As they left the beach together, Elena's hand in Thomas's, their children's laughter carried away by the ocean breeze, she thought one final time about the woman who'd knelt on that Persian rug 3 years ago, pregnant and humiliated and broken by a man who'd never deserved her love. That woman had survived. That woman had rebuilt. That woman had found something infinitely more valuable than revenge. She'd found a man who would kneel beside her, rather than force her to kneel alone. And together they'd built a life where love was measured by loyalty rather than wealth, and where happiness came from Sunday morning pancakes rather than society parties. Daniel had handed her divorce papers and thought he was ending their story, but he'd actually given her permission to begin the life she was always meant to live. And for that, though she would never tell him, Elena was almost grateful.